Welcome to Own It, the podcast where we talk to real estate thought leaders about embracing your strengths, taking your career to new heights, and owning your future. I'm Hillary Saunders, co-founder and chief broker officer at Side. Welcome to Own It, and I'm always excited to be joined by my very handsome co-host, Spencer Kroll.
Hillary, you are so kind. I'm always very excited to be here, if only because of the party bags you have afterwards. So.
You know, I was feeling a little inspired when I saw Martha Stewart on the cover of Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Edition, and I wanted to ask you if you've been on the cover of any other magazines similarly to Miss Stewart.
Not any magazine I'm going to discuss on this show. I'll just leave it at that.
Right, got you. Well, the reason I bring that up is I am so excited to bring on our next guest. She and I had an amazing opportunity to meet each other, get to know each other when we were featured on the cover of Housing Wire Women of Influence edition back in 2021, along with Rebecca McDonald, who is the chief product officer at Rocket Mortgage. And we found a connection with our passion for elevating the real estate industry, making home ownership fair, equitable, and accessible to all. And she's going to be a firecracker, so get ready.
I am ready. I'm looking forward to this because I really enjoyed learning a little bit about her, just reading about her in that magazine in which you were in the cover. Yeah.
Right, I know, but Pam Perry is way more than a cover girl. She has accolades that go back to having a legal education at Harvard, being the in-house counsel for Freddie Mac, and now as vice president of Equitable Housing at Freddie Mac. So I'm just going to go ahead and welcome Pam Perry to Own It. Pam, I'm so excited to see you. I haven't seen you in 2 years.
Wow. Thank you, Hillary. It's great to be here.
You know, it's crazy when we were prepping this podcast episode, and I was going back through looking at and reading the Housing Wire magazine, Women of Influence, that we were on. I think it was 2021, right? So that was 2 years ago. And a lot has happened since then. So I'm very glad that we get to catch up.
Yeah, likewise. It's terrific.
This is awesome. Well, Spencer is my co-host, and you got to meet him a little bit earlier, but we'd love to just dive right in. So as the VP of Equitable Housing at Freddie Mac, obviously you didn't just walk in straight out of school into that job. We would love to hear how you came about to this amazing position. We'll get into the nitty-gritty later, but what's the story? How did you get here?
So I'm a lawyer by training, and I practice.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Right. You caught me off guard there for a minute.
Sorry. Well, we, as recovering attorneys, we understand. So
yes,
same club.
Exactly. I, however, practiced law for longer than you. It took me longer to find my path to recovery, so to speak. I practiced law for 30 years in a variety of different contexts, and really, for the decade preceding my current role, I was a practicing fair lending lawyer at Freddie Mac at the time when the racial justice movement of 2020 came to be. I was leading fair lending at Freddie Mac. And at that time, Freddie Mac, like every other company in America, was really looking inward at what role are we playing to make a more racially just society, or what role should we be playing? And as the fair lending lawyer and the person who was always talking about race, I was invited into every one of those conversations with senior management. And after the course of a few months, our then CEO made the determination that look, these conversations among leadership with Pam in the room were not really getting us anywhere. We need a full-time officer in the company dedicated to this function, and offered me the job. So that's really how it happened. I was asked to step out of my legal role and step into the business and lead the company's racial equity strategy. To address the needs of, the long underserved Black home ownership issue and Black wealth creation. And, through the course of the 2.5 years, I guess, I've been in this role, we've kind of expanded beyond addressing just the situation of underserved Black population to other underserved populations, including Latinos and certain segments of the AAPI community.
I want to pick up on one thing that you said there, which I found really interesting, is that you had been in the trenches already with this for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. Did you feel sometimes like you were just screaming into the wind, and then it took 2020 and the events of 2020 in order for them to say, okay, we have to take this seriously? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's not to say that Freddie Mac didn't take the issue seriously, but I think the reality is for most of the financial services industry, we viewed these issues. I mean, fair lending and equity are really opposite sides of the same coin. We viewed these through the lens of what do we need to do to not get in trouble? And it was simply, what do we need to do to comply with the law? Not what do we need to do to affirmatively advance the interests of underserved minority populations, but what do we need to do to just comply with the law and not have federal regulators or others or our reputations on the line? So it's literally we were just concerned with going up to the line of what's legal. It was viewed as a compliance obligation rather than a moral obligation or a matter of justice.
Spencer and I talk about this a lot, which is historically the real estate industry has been like that, right? Mm-hmm. It's always disclose only to the line of that you need to. Don't go above and beyond what you should be doing as an agent. Don't, you've got to color within the lines. Don't even think about going outside the lines. Yeah. So in your opinion and in your experience, especially being in the politics of the East Coast, why do you think that has been so ingrained in our industry of not thinking outside the box, not pushing the envelope?
Because this system works to advance the interests of those who are in power, just like every system that is functioning. It is functioning as designed. It was designed to advance the interests of middle-class white America. And it has done so very well for the last 50 years. It was not designed to advance the interests of any other population. And asking those in power to cede some of that power or to cede something that is working well for them, I don't think that this is unique. It's the same situation on gender issues, race issues, the power structure, the systemic issues are working for a certain segment of the population. And so to ask those very same people for whom the system is working to disrupt or change that system, that's not going to be the natural order. It requires disruption. It requires, in fact, allowing other people to prosper beyond the people who are prospering today. And that is always a very challenging type of transformation.
I want to play a little bit of like a kind of a "this is your life" sort of part. I don't know if you guys even know what I'm talking about here, but I think Pam,
don't worry, we do.
All right, I just want to make sure. And I think Pam, you and I I think we're both about 40 years old, so I think we both have. So you mentioned
we were once.
I'll leave. You know what? That's great. Yeah, people always say, "Oh, I'm celebrating my 40th birthday this year," and they go, "You're not 40." I go, "No, but I'm still celebrating that one." But you grew up in Boston, which I think is one of obviously the most, or was. I mean, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Incredibly prejudiced, I guess I can say, area in the United States. And there was the busing issues in the late 70s and 80s, of course, and all of that. You grew up in Boston. You have a very interesting story about your parents weren't able to rent a home in the area. Your father was at MIT, is that right? Or he was at,
So by full disclosure, I didn't grow up there, but I was born there and lived there as a very young child before my parents moved. And I was raised in upstate New York in a very different situation. But, my parents are both initially from the South, as, many Black people of their generation were, and both of their families moved to Chicago. And my parents were raised in the South Side of Chicago. And they had, each of them in their own way, found their paths to education and met in college and made the decision that they were seeking the best life possible for themselves and the family that they created. And they were kind of the outliers in their family who left, and they followed jobs. They followed my father's career. And my father was an engineer and had the good fortune to work for a lot of very large corporations at a time when that was a very good field. I mean, it remains a good field to be in, but he worked for, he worked for Boeing and General Motors and IBM. He worked for IBM for most of his career. And retired from IBM. And as a result of that, IBM towns don't tend to be the most diverse places on the face of the earth. And they chose the town that they raised us in was an IBM town where there were, in fact, very few.
Was this Armonk? We're talking Armonk?
No, not Armonk. Actually, Binghamton, New York.
Oh, okay.
So there were two IBM facilities there. And like the high school that I went to, I mean, I didn't know that people could have jobs other than all I knew were everybody's father worked at IBM. People were IBMers. Your dad's either an engineer at IBM or your dad's like the dentist or the orthodontist or the doctor, right? Like it was a community where everybody was very much the same. And it was a very predominantly white community. It is very different now. My family moved away and my mother ended up moving back there for her retirement. And it is now a much more diverse and very different community. And it's no longer an IBM town. But when I grew up there, IBM was the main white collar job in town. And so most folks who were comfortably middle class were IBM families.
Did you ever aspire to also be an engineer, or how did you get into the legal education?
No, I definitely did not aspire to be an engineer. I was a math kid, but I did not have those aspirations. I wanted to be a doctor. When I went to college, that was what I initially aspired to do. I was a math major in college, and then I pivoted to applied math to economics, and then I dropped the math part and I dropped the pre-med part, and I just kind of made a complete transformation. I was a young person with no idea what I wanted to do, and oftentimes I say, I'm in my 50s now, but I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Although it's looking like there are fewer years ahead of me than there are behind me from a career standpoint. I hope. Go ahead.
Well, no, I interrupted you on this, but I wanted to talk about your family's issues with not being able to rent a home, which is, about the story with the rent forgiveness.
Yeah. So I wish that were a story that was placed in the 1960s and didn't happen, but it continues to happen. And that particular anecdote that I had shared when I had been interviewed for Housing Wire a couple of years ago was, my family was relocating. My parents had relocated from Seattle for this job at MIT for my father, and they couldn't find a place to live because nobody would rent to them. And ultimately, he was at MIT, but he was out on assignment from Boeing, and he was working on a NASA project at MIT. And ultimately, Boeing ended up buying a home for my parents to live in because there wasn't an appropriate place for them to live. These are, my father was a brilliant engineer.
Through law school and understanding historical, there's so many classes that we took that had racial issues at the center of them. Did you know at that point that you wanted to be an advocate, or was that something that you grew into through your tenure at Freddie Mac as counsel?
So I very much wanted to be a public interest lawyer when I was in law school, although there was no way I could see the path to affording doing that given all of the educational debt that I had. Not unlike many law students. In law school, I joined the Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review. I was managing editor of the Law Review. I wrote a law review article. I was deeply passionate about civil rights issues and did consider how could I craft a career in this space that I felt so strongly about. But the reality of, a mountain of educational debt, it just didn't seem even remotely possible. So I took the path of least resistance, which was go to work for a law firm so that I could pay off this debt and have choices later, not realizing that working at a law firm, is soul sucking in so many ways.
I was just about to say literally that. And then I kind of was like, maybe I shouldn't, but no, it is. And I will cheers you with my glass of water with that one, because...
And yet one of my biggest regrets is not going to law school, right? So, because I don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Well, that's why you have an honorary law degree from your own made-up university, Spencer.
It is a fake law degree from my own, from Center Merchants. And by the way, Pam, I do want to commend you in all seriousness, because you're just like, I went to school in Boston. Instead of saying I went to school in Cambridge. So I want to give you credit on that, because I get that. So I want to get back to something in terms of civil rights, and you were talking about that you were involved with groups in college, and then I know that 2020 and you're working within the company, and there was a group I think called Arise, which was the Black.
Yeah, that's our Black employee resource group.
Yeah, so I'm just two things. I guess the first one is, how instrumental was that in terms of getting these policies changed, right? From you screaming into the wind? I guess here's the overall question I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Outside civil rights and social equity groups and social justice groups, I think, again, we're screaming into the wind. Do you think that there's now an opportunity where they really can make a difference and politicians are going to answer? And what has to happen to change the system to that degree? And maybe you need about 4 hours to answer this. I don't know.
Wow, there's a lot in that question. Wow, Spencer. I think I was hopeful in 2020. I hate to think that I was naive. Didn't we all think that this is the moment, the stars have aligned? People are marching in the streets of every race and ethnicity. People that are protesting in the streets with their children. Like, this was unthinkable, right? What we saw in our own communities. And yet, then I think like, oh, how foolish of me to think that that the pendulum wouldn't swing back. And I think I knew that the pendulum would swing back. I don't think that most people who had positive intent in 2020 have ceased having that positive intent. But I do think that a lot of the power structure in the country, I do think that I notice even in Washington, Washington is a town that is accustomed to the pendulum swinging back. If it swings left, it's going to swing right. Like, we all know that, right? But I really thought that some portion of this momentum was so powerful that it could override the typical kind of partisan swings, because it felt like a change in the moral fabric of the country. And I'm not sure that it was, right? I really, there's too much evidence to suggest that it hasn't done so as much as we had hoped that it would. And I even think of, very often I find myself thinking in terms of change that we are looking to pursue to drive impact and expanding access to credit, expanding home ownership for borrowers of color. It feels like there is this notion of like, we need to do it in a way that's durable. So we need to do it in a way that is conservative proof or Supreme Court proof. Conservative Supreme Court proof, right? And the conservative Supreme Court will persist beyond changes in administration in Washington. That's a generational situation that we have right now. But it very quickly it became, we wouldn't want to go too far. We wouldn't want to antagonize. We wouldn't want to, precipitate the backlash. And so much so that it felt like, here we are paralyzed. We have a moment in time when we as a country are appearing to move, dare I say, left on racial justice issues, which shouldn't even be left, shouldn't be partisan. And very quickly we're like, well, we wouldn't want to go too far. And it's like, wait, right?
You know what's so interesting is like the enthusiasm that you are exuding is palatable. I can speak really. That I remember when in 2020, when everybody was marching and showing their support for everyone, and it really did feel like that tide changing moment, I can pinpoint exactly where I was, those feelings that I had, and that inspiration that came up. And my question to you is, do you think that the reason why the change that we thought was imminent didn't occur was because the people who were willing to put forth the effort to make a change either didn't know how or didn't have the platform or opportunity to make that change? Like the average, mom and dad out on the streets that have, 8 hours a day working at the local restaurant or whatever, they don't know how to implement that in their community, right? Do you think that we as a leadership didn't provide them the tools on any level? I feel like when you try and make such a monumental change, the average person who wants to provide their support just might not know how to do it.
I think that's fair, and I don't fault the average person who is, raising his or her family and going to work and going on about their lives. I think that there is not the political will, and I say political not just in the construct of Washington, but in the construct of boardrooms. And you as a I will pick on financial services since we are all part of the financial services industry in one way or another. The financial services companies made commitments to advancing racial equity, and those commitments in many respects felt very significant, and some of them were, but they weren't necessarily renewable commitments. They were almost like, okay, I'm caught. I've been benefiting from these injustices, and so now I must pay a fine. So I'm going to pay that fine. And it was we spent X dollars penance, and that's it. It's a one-time thing, or a one-time thing that occurred. The money may have been expended over a period of a couple of years, but that's it. Now I'm back to business as usual. Or it's not necessarily reflective of an institutional change or a willingness to make institutional change as much as my moral underpinnings say, we need to do something, so we will, we'll pay at the altar right now, but that's it, I paid. Or
right.
Not a sense of, something needs to change.
Well, I think as we're proving as a country with regard to climate change and how well we're really making the changes we need to make now, I think we're really, really good at looking forward and really making those changes in advance. That was a little bit sarcastic. You're saying something which I think is really interesting, and I think you have to look at a lot of the where changes have come in. Obviously, the civil rights movement, and that's what made government move the needle. And then I think it was kind of like, oh, okay, we're done. And I love when people say, oh, well, we've done with that. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. It's like, no, we've started. And now we have to move on. And other movements, gay rights, which I think a lot of it came out of the AIDS activist movements. What is this? A really fun, light podcast today. And I know, like, what is it going to take? Because, Black Lives Matter, 2020 and all that was great. And everybody put a Black Lives Matter sign in their window. And then it's like, oh, I'm done. So
what is it going to take? But also what, let's focus on that you are actually making inroads in one of the biggest financial names, at least in the real estate community, right? Freddie Mac, it's huge. So what programs are you working on, or what's coming up that our listeners can be like, oh my gosh, my clients can totally benefit from this? Because one of my personal goals in my life, in my career, is to elevate the entire real estate industry. And in that process, we are making it available to all of our community, thank you, to elevate their clients. And majority of them are putting in a ton of sweat equity to advance home ownership in the Black, brown, and underserved communities. So what can we provide them with guidance and tools and things that they can go and help their own clients?
Okay, thank you, Hillary, for pulling me up out of the valley of despair and going
let's do something positive.
And I apologize for bringing you into the valley there. I'm sorry.
Look, I don't like to live in the valley of despair. I like to live in the valley of positive change. And just like I like to live in believing that most people have positive intent. In terms of how can your community of real estate professionals advance homeownership, one of the barriers to achieving homeownership is understand for a family looking to achieve homeownership, or not even realizing that they can achieve homeownership, is education. That's a safe issue, right? Lack of education is an issue that everybody can get behind addressing. An informed consumer is the best consumer, whether it's in terms of housing or any other good or service that a consumer needs. And so there are real disparities in education. Obviously, one of the number one indicators of whether you will achieve homeownership is whether your parents were homeowners. So that's really a matter of not just a matter of wealth, which is a significant issue, that wealth gets passed down generationally, but also of merely understanding finances more generally, having financial capability generally, and then understanding what it takes to achieve and sustain home ownership. If you've grown up in a home where your parents owned that home, you have seen the playbook day by day, what it takes. You may understand more personally at a very young age what it takes to save to get into a home, what the costs of home ownership are. You may understand that once you get into a home, your refrigerator still may break and need to be replaced. There's not a landlord you can call. Your parents are going to have to call somebody to fix that, and they're going to have to pay for that. And that may impact their budget in other ways. So there are certain things that we all can get behind, which is understanding your finances, educating people, not just at the point of achieving homeownership, but getting people ready for homeownership.
The interesting part about the education piece is it goes across the board. Yes. Every single person, doesn't matter what color you are, what anything you are, at least I'm going to speak from my own experiences, there was not a, let's call it your own finance class in high school, mm-hmm. right? We all went off to college or started jobs or whatever and had no idea how to balance a checkbook. That's how old I am, a checkbook, versus Venmo. But you know what I mean? And the education piece, I think NAR is really trying on a national level to provide mm-hmm. tools to realtors mm-hmm. to say, okay, I can have a first-time home buyer class in my office, and here I'm going to provide this material. I'm not teaching people how to balance a budget, but I'm giving them resources to find out more information. So I think fantastic. Education is huge.
It is. And so I actually, for 20 years, Freddie Mac has had a free educational tool called CreditSmart. And it is a curriculum that we've digitized and made it, more app driven and module driven and just in time education. It's 17 different modules, and it's available for free to the public, to real estate professionals, to housing counselors to use with consumers. And actually, my 17-year-old daughter and I are becoming CreditSmart Coach certified right now as our mother-daughter. They still don't teach financial literacy in school, as I can tell you.
Oh, great!
Having teenagers, and so Freddie Mac's CreditSmart curriculum is, we also offer Train the Trainer, and so we are doing a Train the Trainer curriculum during the month of June, and the other members of the course are loan officers and real estate professionals. And so the expectation is that they will then go out and offer this training to their constituents.
So real estate agents, for the most part, do have an incredible passion for real estate, and that's one of the things, especially with a lot of the agents that I work with now. They like really care, which is wonderful. So I'm just curious, like, where do you see the intersection? Like what can so someone's listening to this, and they're like, I want to change things. Like, what can an agent do?
So I think realistically, most people enter the home buying process and they contact a real estate agent. I think that real estate agents, for most families seeking a home, you are that family's first contact. I mean, really, real estate professionals, while it may not be your job to help a family find financing for a home, you are in an incredible position of power in terms of educating that family about products that are safe and sound, and providing that family with information about options in terms of financing the purchase of a home. And there are a lot of really wonderful products that require low down payment to achieve first-time home ownership. And the reality is, if a family picks up the phone and calls a bank or goes online to search for a home loan, there's a high likelihood that they're going to be steered into a particular product that may not be the best option for them. And you, as real estate professionals, have an opportunity to provide a broader perspective to that family about the available even types of products, even if you're not steering that particular family in the direction of a particular lender. You have an opportunity to provide just-in-time education and guidance to that family. And for most families, you are their trusted advisor in the process.
Yeah, it's really funny. I think a lot of agents are saying, like, what can I do to change it? They might not realize how important they are. There's an agent I used to work with, and he said, and his mantra every day was, I'm going to change someone's life today. And I always thought that was, I always thought that was such a great thing. And I've got to tell you, I really never understood. I mean, until just right now, how powerful that could be. And I think if agents take that on more as a stance, and now, hopefully people are listening to this, like, they now can add that as a cause. Like, that could be added to their passion, not just for architecture, but how can you change someone's life today?
I love that.
And I think at the end of the day, most realtors got into the business because of the relationships they build with other people, their clients, the families or individuals that they do, help and service. And I'm thinking, just keeping it in the forefront of your mind that, every client of yours is an opportunity to really help them make a better decision. Even if you don't know what's better, you're so well connected to the industry experts around you who can. And if they're like-minded, you can collectively set families, set individuals, your clients up for massive success they wouldn't have otherwise. I think it's an easy one to keep in the forefront of your mind.
Yeah. So following on that same theme, one of the areas where I think we have a lot of opportunity to do better is as it relates to sustaining homeownership, home retention. It's one thing to achieve first-time homeownership, but it's quite another to be successful in that model. And we looked at the financial crisis, the housing crisis in 2008, 2009, and the degree to which that really wiped out wealth, particularly for so many Black families. That's a tragedy. Part of that was families not being in appropriate mortgage products. And part of it is a matter of education and not really understanding options available for home retention. And so, one of the things that I think of real estate agents, you have a Rolodex. You have a Rolodex of clients whom you helped achieve home ownership. And that Rolodex, you can mine it to help clients retain that home ownership. And one of the things that we've noted coming out of the refinance boom of recent years is that affluent, more educated consumers, disproportionately white, benefited from historically low mortgage rates through refinance. And less well-educated borrowers did not. So again, it goes to this notion of trusted advisors. And I do think that real estate agents are uniquely positioned as trusted advisors. And while it's not your primary job, I think as members of your communities, and I happen to know a number of real estate professionals who are active in their communities beyond just helping families purchase a home. And it is an opportunity through the work that you do in your communities to continue on as trusted advisors for families after they have achieved home ownership, and helping make sure that they are educating themselves about the opportunities, both in a loss mitigation space, but along the whole journey, hoping that they retain that home so that they can accumulate wealth through home ownership.
Hillary, I say we end on a high note right now. That was so perfect.
What's so funny is that we could go on for hours on this topic. I think that's how we kind of started out, just talking like, how long do you have? But before we do wrap up, Pam, first of all, I want to thank you immensely for joining us and your perspective today. And we're going to gather after and make sure that we log all the tips and things that you talked about and put them in our show notes so people can click and learn more. But before we end, you started a why refi campaign, or we're working on that in the last year. And granted, the interest rates have changed dramatically, but generally speaking, what were you trying to accomplish with that campaign? I think you just touched on it a little bit. This goes way beyond race. It goes into class and, using your biggest asset to your own benefit, really. What were you trying to accomplish, and where do you see it going in the next couple of years? We'll end on that.
Well, we really were trying to be a neutral, trusted third party, trying to encourage borrowers who had not benefited from the low interest rate environment to do so, or to at least evaluate doing so, with limited success, frankly. But one of the things that we have continued to do, even though the rate environment has shifted and, for all intents and purposes, the refi boom, it's over, right? Given where rates are today, but rates are cyclical. Rates won't remain at this level, right? And there are people, even with rates double where they were a couple of years ago, there are borrowers still achieving first-time home ownership who will benefit from refinance in the foreseeable future. And so one of the things that we are actively doing is we are actively working toward being ready for the next downturn. It's not just like we think we need to be ready for the next pandemic. It's not whether there will be another pandemic. There will be another pandemic. Will we be ready? There will be another downturn in rates. Will we be ready? And will we be ready in a way to make sure that refinance activity occurs more equitably the next time we are in a rate environment that is conducive to refinance? And so we hadn't done that. And by we, I mean, none of us were ready for the refi boom that occurred. We weren't staffed appropriately. We want to have it ready on the shelf so that when we enter a favorable rate environment again, we have the playbook ready. We have the playbook ready. We have the systems ready. We can staff up for it or shift staff from purchase staff to refinance activity. So hashtag why refi.
Hashtag will we be ready?
Well, I want to talk about this, which is really interesting in just terms of the refinance. What a lot of my smart clients are doing, and I would kind of lead them down the road with it, but I would say is that they are refinancing their property and pulling money out, which doesn't have, you don't have to pay taxes on that. And they're using that money to buy an investment property, which could be a condo or a single family home. And they're using that as an investment, and they're even giving it to their kids, or they're starting it as a college fund for their grandkids. The number of people that had no idea about the cash out refi in terms of the taxes on that or no taxes on that, or that an investment property is something that they could do with that money, or that an investment property didn't have to be a building. It could be a condo or a home. And that's with affluent buyers. I mean, you're talking about people taking advantage of the refi. That's one of the things I wanted to ask about your parents, just to go back to this, because they were finally able to buy a home. Did they refi, or were they able to take advantage of the equity? And is that where you kind of got your basis?
Yeah. So I won't say that I got my basis in terms of in home ownership. I mean, I worked as a lawyer. I earned the money, but my parents second mortgaged our home to pay part of our college expenses. I mean, we had 3 kids in college at one time, and while we received financial aid, my parents took a lot of money out of their equity in their home to finance those lean years and be able to support us educationally. And I think that's a very common thing for families to do who have a significant amount of equity in their homes. I mean, don't get me started on education expenses, since I have 2 college educations looming. No, we won't.
We won't sour. We will not sour this podcast experience with that. But gosh, there's so much to unpack in this chat, and we could, like I said, we could go on for hours. But maybe we'll do a second down the road.
Part two.
But thank you, Pam. We appreciate you and everything that you're doing at Freddie Mac, and the focus and the shining the spotlight that you were doing on home ownership across the board. So cheers to you and congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Good to meet you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hillary, we could keep doing this for, I think there's going to have to be a part 2, maybe a part 3 after this. This could go on forever. This was really great.
You know what might be really fun too down the road is having some type of roundtable. Just the amount of activism and passion that Pam has, and she's so well connected. We didn't even go into like politics and how to change Washington. There's a whole Netflix series. Well, I think you sure you don't want to go back to writing?
I don't know. I just, it's just. The stuff that she talked about, the passion that she brought to it, and the whole thing about how she's trying to change society. She's trying to change the system, I should say, right? Trying to change the system, and we're part of that system. I mean, I think that's a really important thing. So we can be little pieces of change.
And I think one thing that came out of our conversation that maybe we didn't think of going into it is it's not just a race issue, it's a class issue. There are obstacles to becoming homeowners across the board. It doesn't matter if you're black, brown, white, Asian, doesn't matter. It's class too, and not having the education is spot on. So I think our community, the realtor community in general, has the opportunity to provide the tools to educate their clients, whether it's inner city, rural, doesn't matter, college students, we have those tools.
Well, the financial literacy obviously is a part of it, but also the homeowner literacy. So also she was saying is being, okay, now I have a home, now what do I do, right? A refi. And I think she was saying that it was such a stretch just to get the home that the idea of a refi, it might be just too daunting for people, and yet we need to educate people, and the education continues, right? It doesn't just stop. Ernie, you do a lot of stuff with a home that you might not realize.
Continuing, we participate in continuing education all the time. And I think the average homeowner, I will just raise my hand and say, my garage door broke the other day, and that was money I had not intended on spending on something not sexy like a garage door. Yeah. But that is life. And just thinking about that and making sure that you have reserves on hand for those incidentals is just one tiny little tip.
Sure. And also, again, like, what's the game plan? Also, okay, I own a home. Now I'm going to refi and I'm going to go buy something else that's income producing, or I'm going to use it and pay for, college or something like that. But like, what is the game plan along the way? And it can shift, but you got to be thinking about it. And by the way, I realize how traumatic this garage door spring thing is, because this is now the second time you've mentioned it. Not on this call, but
you're like, yeah, Hillary's got a little bit of PTSD. No, just kidding. Pam is incredible. Her energy is infectious. She is inspirational, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her speak more, whether it's at conferences or any other kind of outlet. But we will make sure to include in our show notes the educational opportunities that she mentioned, anything at Freddie Mac that you can take to your clients. And if you have questions for Pam, as always, please email us and we will pass those along and be happy to share responses. But Spencer, until next time, sir, it's always a pleasure hanging out with you and our exciting guests.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Hillary. I really do enjoy doing this, so thank you.